Hello, everyone. We're so glad to have you back at Base Camp today. We are going to talk about conjugal duties. That is to say, how much should each spouse be obligated to do sexy times with the other spouse? And is that important?
Well,
So,
yes, and
Malcolm.
consent in marriages and everything like that.
Would you like to know more?
The
Yeah.
reason I wanted to do this particular topic is because when fundy snark channels, when the channels that make fun of conservatives have their pearl clutching, "Oh, I cannot believe they said that,"
Yeah.
moments,
Yeah.
one of the most classic is around a wife's conjugal duties. The idea that a wife either would not have the ability to decline consent in a marriage, or that a wife would have a duty to have sexual relations with her husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something along those
So
lines.
we hadn't actually talked that much about this as a concept before, Simone, and this is just something that hasn't really come up with us because I've never understood. I guess it didn't occur to me that you would ever say no if I wanted to do something. So I am wondering, how do you what are your thoughts on this topic? Do women have a conjugal duty to their husbands?
And I'm sure you can predict this, my response is it all depends on what the relationship is founded on. If the relationship is founded on sex, then absolutely. If everything is predicated on that, if you know that your partner married you because they wanted to have sex frequently or because they found you sexually attracted and wanted to have sex with you regularly and are marrying you for sexual access, that is part of your obligation. A really common stereotype of relationships, so it's common as a stereotype because it's true, is that really high wealth, high value men may marry a trophy wife who is much younger, perhaps not as professionally or financially successful, but very sexy for that sexual access. And in that case, it would be insane for the young woman who ends up getting married to act as though it is anything but absolutely her conjugal duty to satisfy this partner sexually, as long as they're married, no matter how she feels like she should behave, as long as he is keeping up his end of the bargain, which typically is, you will live in luxury, you will get jewelry, you will get clothing, you will go on fancy trips, have the best food, whatever. So I think the whole point is, and this is why relationship contracts are so important. Partners need to know what is being exchanged before they get married, because it is 100% your obligation. In fact, I'm so vehement on this that, let's say I'm a young, beautiful woman and an older man marries me because they want to regularly have sex with a young, beautiful woman.
Yeah.
Like, let's say I'm courting Leonardo DiCaprio and I'm 18, all right? I think that it is my duty.
So we have to put the Leonardo DiCaprio chart on the screen here where he's breaking up with people. What age is it when they turn 23?
I think it's like 24 or something like that. It's mid-20s. And along those lines, I think he's a really great example here. I would put in our relationship contract, if I were to marry Leonardo DiCaprio, as that he would have every right to sleep with whatever woman he chooses. And I may even offer to help source those women after I age out of his attractive age range, if I want to maintain that relationship. In other words, if I want to continue to be his wife and continue to have access to presumably his wealth, his connections, whatever, whatever he brings to the table, then I would then need to continue to provide that item of value that I provide as a wife.
Word what she just said differently, because it's funny. You're taking an incredibly, some people would say conservative extremist position, and then immediately flipping to a progressive extremist position.
This is what pragmatism looks like. Pragmatism is unmoored from political bias.
So you are saying that, okay, if you are a woman who's coming into a relationship without bringing much to the table in terms of your own career or really anything else, like you would see in a typical trophy wife,
right?
In that case, just undisputedly, every time conjugal duty is obviously what's expected because that's what's being traded for.
Yes.
But in the case of Leonardo DiCaprio, you pointed something out. You pointed out an individual, and we will say that Leonardo DiCaprio has a very strong preference for women between a certain age range.
Exactly.
Now, regardless of how disgusting you as an individual find that, or we as society may find that, you're just basically throwing that out the window. You're basically being, look, I am like a restaurant server girl, and somehow I got Leonardo DiCaprio, fabulously wealthy, famous person, to marry me.
Right.
I'm going to be happy with that.
Yeah.
But I also see this trend in his past dating life, which is he always leaves people at X age. So
Mhm.
how can I create a deal with him where being in a relationship with me is still something that is on the aggregate desirable to him, even when sexual relations with me are no longer
Well,
desirable?
because I think what you have to do is actually parse out the thing of value that the person wants in a relationship. And the thing of value in this case is sexual access to a female under, we'll say, 24 years old. And so if you are no longer a female under 24 years old, you're going to have to figure out how to either end the relationship in an amicable way. So there has to be like a really good prenup. It's okay. When I turn 24, here's we get the
Well,
divorce and
okay,
then I get this
actually,
much money.
yeah, you would need a really strong prenup if you were going into it this way because
Yeah,
it'd
well,
be
and
like,
to
look
just
at the
like
witness
literally plan for
protection.
it. Like we have a birthday
Yeah.
party that's an equal divorce party. The lawyer's already paid for all these things, or you have to have a contingency plan. I want to add though that there's another part to this that I think is really important that shows up a ton in the
Okay.
fundy commitments to sex.
Oh, but I also want to hear what you think of age gap relationships before you go into this. A lot of people would be like, it's just fundamentally unethical how young the women he's sleeping with are.
Yeah, I don't think that those women are unaware of what's going on. This is not a situation in which they aren't aware of the fact that they're trading their beauty and youth
Mhm.
for power and fame. You
I
know?
would argue, I think you're right. Like at some level, they must understand what's going on.
Mhm.
However, I would also say that um, they may not realize that essentially he is spending their most desirable years, or they are spending their most desirable years on an individual who is going to leave them, and they won't be able to attract the same quality partner they will when they're older, just because
Yeah,
society.
but also society doesn't tell women that they're spending the most desirable years on university and career without getting married, thereby wasting their ability to secure one of the good males before all the males get taken.
So sorry, I love this take. Hold on, before we go to the thing that the funny community does, your take is age gap relationships are wrong, not because of coercion or power differential, i.e., the reasons progressives think age gap relationships are wrong. Your take is age gaps relationships are wrong because it uses up a girl's best market years without her having full knowledge that she is spending those years. And that's where the unethical, but you say that they are not differentially wrong when compared to what all other girls are doing. So you don't complain. But if it was one of our daughters, you likely wouldn't allow them to do that.
It's not that I wouldn't allow them. Our daughters would understand the opportunity cost of that choice. And I think
Yes.
there's something very different from opportunity cost knowledge. And I think what's more commonly implied is that, oh, these men are so much older and more experienced, they'll win every single argument. But I'm like, excuse me, who do you think is more manipulative? The 54-year-old man or the 23-year-old girl? Like the girl is going to school this son of a bitch. I just
Yeah.
don't know what else to say.
No, I actually love this.
We have an amazing relationship, and it's very physical. I mean, he still pushes all my buttons. People say, oh, but he's so much older than you. And you know what? I'm the one having to push him away. We both have so much in common. We both love soup, and we love snow peas, and talking and not talking. We could not talk or talk forever and still find things to not talk about.
I would argue that if you just look at this from an outsider's perspective, you have a young, underemployed 23-year-old girl who is dating a billionaire guy or multimillionaire guy. Who is the one that you think is the manipulative one here? And here I'm going to play a clip from Best in Show of the girl who's dating like the old guy who's about to croak and is sleeping with her trainer, like she's actually a lesbian and she's just dating him obviously for money. Like, who do you really? I do love that where they're like, oh, it must be the guy who's manipulating the girl. Like, what a silly and misogynistic thought to have.
Yeah. Well,
When
there's
I
also
think,
this concept of financial abuse, right? Where like when a partner, it could be female, but typically it's the men who are accused of this, the male breadwinner or the wealthy male in a trophy wife situation, financially abusing his wife because he has access to all the money. Now, obviously, there are some cases of genuine, almost captures where, women are totally disempowered. They have no ability to just get out of a relationship. But most of these situations are people coming in with full knowledge of the fact that they are going to be financially dependent on these men, and then they claim that they've been financially abused by their spouses, when they could just get a job, and it's just that they don't want to get a job. And I'll never forget, you and I were when we first acquired a travel management business, and airlines still gave away business class flights to agency owners, and we were on a business class
because we would
flight.
never normally pay for a business class flight.
No,
Like,
but this
we
is
are
how we got them.
very frugal.
It was great. And there was this woman who,
Sitting next to us who had bought 2 seats.
yeah, because she just wanted this seat next to her empty.
Yes. Now, she was in telling us that she was getting divorced from her husband because he was financially abusing her. And I was like, I hadn't heard the term before. I go, like, what do you mean by that? And he goes, she said I was just wasting money all the time, and I didn't understand the value of money. And now that I'm out of that abusive marriage, I'm free to live my life. And here I am being like, excuse me, you bought 2 business class seats next to each other.
Yeah.
He may have had a point.
Yeah, this is one of those am I the asshole situations.
Anyway,
We did not say anything to her. But anyway, I feel like a lot of the complaints in that realm as well, in terms of age gap relationships, are overblown. People getting into them often, and this is something that is very controversial, but quite honestly, their other options are worse than the suboptimal relationship. I'm not saying it's ideal to be married to someone who you may not have that strong of an emotional connection with, or you may have married, you don't find them attractive, but they give you a lifestyle that you really want. But then again, maybe your other options are to be working at a Starbucks and you really hate customer service, or to be doing a door-to-door sales job. I don't know.
And
To be
something that
Uber
you have
driving.
pointed out in previous episodes is people talk about the quote unquote abuse that happens in a marriage when they are contrasting that with sitting at home and having all the money you could ever want in the world, instead of the hardship of a day-to-day office job or low education job,
Yeah.
which is generally that sets the bar of what is more abusive than that pretty high. So let's go down the argument that you were going to make initially, which is something you've noticed in fundy relationships.
Yeah. So what's often talked about and implied within fundy or even just conservative or traditional relationships is this: the husband gets sex whenever he wants it, and the wife will never say no. And it just happens. And that it's often not, when the women write about their encounters, their intimate encounters, there's not a lot of foreplay, like whatever. It just happens and then it's over. And then people like Ben Shapiro have talked about things like female lubrication not being a real thing, according to his wife or something. And one really gets the impression that a lot of these more conservative religious wives are technically not withholding sex, but as far as I'm concerned, they are not offering their part of the bargain because they are starfishing, which is to say they're just lying back and taking it for the country. When I think that if a person marries you, male or female, I do not care, for sexual pleasure, your job is to understand what their sexual interests are and to meet those sexual interests satisfactorily. And I will say the one universal thing that seems to be so common across most genres is enthusiasm from the partner. Is, oh my gosh, I love you. I cannot wait to do X to you. I cannot wait for you to do X to me. Oh my gosh, I am loving this. Yes, blah, blah, blah. Like just lying there and taking it is almost worse than denying it, which I think is
but I also
super
think
underrated.
that this is likely a two-sided thing. So
Okay.
An interesting thing about Ben Shapiro's case is, you may not know this, but if he was actually practicing a conservative Jewish lifestyle, one of the responsibilities, and I forget the word here, but there's 3 core responsibilities a husband has with his wife. And one of the 3 is to make sure that he is sexually satisfying her.
Right.
And so he is technically failing at being a Jew, if this is accurate, that he is not pleasing her. And I think that this comes to a point here that you made, which is just really important, which conjugal duty, I would actually argue, and I think you argue this as well, is almost like less, like if it's less than what is actually expected of an individual.
Totally.
You don't have a conjugal duty. If you are just performing a conjugal duty, you are not performing the role in the relationship, the sexual role in a relationship that's actually expected of a partner. What is actually expected is that you take the satisfaction of your partner as seriously as almost anything else. As I say, the only two responsibilities you have above your spouse's well-being is to God and your kids. And after that, your spouse comes above yourself, significantly above yourself. And that means that you should attempt to understand exactly what they're into. It's not like I'm just having sex with you and we're done. It is, let me fully understand. And if you read something like The Pragmatist's Guide to Sexuality, you'll see that the way sexuality actually works is this giant circuit board, basically, of knobs. It's not like a few things that may arouse people. There are, and you can go through the book, hundreds of things that commonly arouse people. These are certain emotional states, certain environmental stimuli, certain visual stimuli, different ways of interacting. Some people are very sexually reactive, meaning that they do not feel arousal or attraction to somebody just from being around them, but they do when the person is engaging them. And and somebody like that might be like you just said, oh, I'm sexually reactive, therefore I'm never going to pursue my partner sexually, right? And it's, why is that the case? And it's like, it doesn't turn me on to do it. And it's like, stop. Does it actively cause you great discomfort to pretend like you're really interested in your partner and start a relationship sometime? You're like, no, not really. A bit of LARP in the beginning isn't that much of a problem. And it's like, then why aren't you doing it if it makes your partner significantly happier? This is what you're doing. And here I would note that where there is the exception is in some individuals, because the way sexuality works, we talk about this in our sexuality book, is it is a scale from arousal to disgust. It doesn't stop at nothing. Disgust is part of the sexual system. You can watch our other videos on this, but it's basically an inverted sexuality. Anything that arouses a large portion of the population is going to disgust some other portion of the population. Anything that disgusts a large portion of the population is going to arouse a small portion of the population. But what this means is that sometimes partners will have really high disgust reactions to a specific thing that you may be into. Now, so that could be something like anal, like just no anal, like a rule, no anal ever, because that would cause me such discomfort that whatever pleasure you're getting from that is just not worth it for our net productivity and desire for each other. And that's okay. It's okay that one partner is like, something that you like causes me great disgust and distress. The problem is when, instead of being, I guess, negative in terms of the things you're taking off the table, okay, this I don't like, this I don't like, this I don't like, is coming at this, these are the 10 things that are approved. Because that is almost certainly not going to overlap with, that's not even like you went and investigated and tried to understand what your partner is into.
Right. Yeah.
But here is where sexuality gets really interesting, I think, from a conjugal duties perspective, which is, it is possible to have a relationship where conjugal duties are not expected.
Oh, totally.
When is that the case? That is the case when it is explicitly stated before the marriage happened. That is when that is the case. And why do I say it needs to be explicitly stated before the marriage happened, or in a marriage contract or something like that? That is because in our society right now, if you are getting into a marriage, the default assumption is that that marriage is going to have a sexual component. And so if one of you goes dead bedrooms, that is turning your back on a component that was a presupposition when the marriage happened. And if you have that presupposition, you're like, yeah, but then I just can't bring myself to sleep with my partner anymore, then that's a serious issue. And there are multiple ways to resolve it. It could be because your partner has let themselves go, in which case they actually violated the contract as well.
So long as you had attractiveness clauses or
no, I'd
clauses.
actually say, I'm talking default societal assumptions. I think if you guys agreed nothing before you got married, and then after you got married, one of you gained a significant amount of weight, and then the other person started.
That's fair. Yeah.
I would say that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If, however, you two are equally fit as when you got into the relationship and one person stops, I would say, no, that's a foul. And that with that foul, that doesn't necessarily mean the marriage has to break up, but it means that person now has the right to look for alternate sources of sexual release.
Yeah. And I think that's super underrated in that I think with especially male sexual interests, this is not so much the case with female sexual interests. Just saying basically, if you can't get it with me, you're welcome to get it somewhere else as the wife is a huge negotiating point that can really keep marriages together, because sometimes women lose their sex drives. Sometimes women just aren't that into it. And I think there's a long history of established older wives who've maybe had a few kids, knowing that their husbands are having affairs, knowing that their husbands sleep with other women or have mistresses, and being like pretty cool with it and having otherwise quite functional relationships, because it's just understood, hey, I'm not the person who's going to provide that part of our relationship anymore. Someone else is going to do it, but I'm glad you're getting it somewhere.
And so what Simone is saying is that if you are a woman, you can augment your value to particularly high status men by altering the expected contract that you're getting into a relationship with them in and allowing them to sleep with other people. Now, a lot of people are like, ew, gross. Like, how could a woman do that? But the problem is that if you are dating like the creme de la creme of society, like billionaires and stuff like that, movie stars, pretty much, because we hang out adjacent to these classes of people, I'd say 70, 80% of their relationships are structured this way.
Just a business relationship. Imagine that you're establishing a contract with a vendor and you'd like it to be a full service contract, and it starts out full service. Let's say you're a resort working with a client and you want that client to always stay at your resort or something. And you have restaurants, you have a spa, you have hotel rooms, and they, and other services, tours, and they use all of that for several years. And then they decide, you know what, I really want sushi. And you don't have a sushi restaurant and there's one right across the street. Like, why is it so impossible that they could get some service somewhere else and then utilize all of your other services, appreciate them, love them,
I
pay
want
for
to
them?
be clear, Simone. I think that this is something that is only viable for basically billionaire class men. I do not think that this works for men below the billionaire class. So 2 quick side notes here. When I say billionaire class men doesn't necessarily mean that they are literally billionaires. It just means that they are the highest status men within their domain of respectability. So for example, a president or a famous philosopher or something like that. And I should also note here that I am explicitly saying men. It does not appear, just anthropologically speaking, that any society I'm aware of has been widespread and successful and allowed women to take multiple partners. The reason being is that women unconsciously bond with their sexual partners much, much more than men do. So even if a woman is just like, well, I want to try something else for a short period, the net effects on her emotional state long term are going to be much more impactful than the net effects on the male's state long term. The only case where I can think of it being okay or for a relationship to be able to stay stable with the wife sleeping with other partners is if the husband is specifically into that and the wife is also into that.
I guess because the assumption is that other women that they would be with would ultimately want a full-time relationship as well.
No, it's because what do you? I have no idea where you're going with this. No, like regular polyamory as practiced within our society is just completely unstable. It doesn't work. However, historically speaking, people who would have been billionaire class, even in monogamous societies, even in Catholic Europe, for example, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of the French monarchs, for example, a lot of the monarchs more broadly had mistresses.
I can't imagine there was one that did not have mistresses.
Yeah, so even within traditional Christian value systems, if you're talking
or gay lovers,
yeah. If you go back and they're like, oh, this wasn't true in the 50s. Excuse me, do you not think the billionaires in our societies in the 50s? Do you not remember like Kennedy and the famous scandal with him and who was it, Marilyn Monroe? The Billionaire men. So why is this the case that the absolute creme de la creme men in our society generally have a choice?
As you've all seen on the news, our country is facing a major crisis. Why? Why are rich, successful men suddenly going out and trying to have sex with lots of women? Why would a man who's famous and makes tons of money use that to try and have sex with lots of different women? And these rich celebrities have perfectly good wives at home. Why would they even think of sex with others? Damn it! I want answers! Of course, we all know the normal, healthy male thinks only of sex occasionally and has no desire for sex with multiple partners. Yeah, that's right, of course. Yes. Definitely true. Yes, we all know that. Go on. To better understand the sex addiction outbreak, we've been running tests on chimpanzees. But now see this chimp here. Now watch. We're going to give it a lot of money. Yes. And what's it doing now? Making a public apology on its talk show.
It's because they are the most desirable class of humans in society. By that, what I mean is if you look at how partner sorting happens, and I'll put a thing on the screen here so you can see, desirable women have it good, but not that good. Because for a desirable woman, if I'm a top 1% desirable woman, the problem is the top 1% desirable men don't just have me to choose from. They basically can choose from any of the groups of women. They'll choose within the top 20% of women often. I will only choose a 1% man. So I actually have a fairly hard time securing a man. And if a woman who is in the top 2% or top 5% tells that guy, hey, look, I'll let you sleep around, and top 1% women aren't coming to them with that proposal, then they're not going to stick with me. And so that's why these men become used to these kinds of proposals from women.
Yeah.
And it's because it becomes a cultural norm in their communities that they adopt it. Do I think it leads to better relationships than the type that I have? No, it just becomes a cultural norm in their communities. So I'll word this differently. I actually think if you are a top billionaire class guy and you get used to this, you will never be able to have a life as happy as my life. And that's one of the things that I often look at, where I'll look at the billionaire men in our society and I'm like, wow, they live in such poverty. I don't know what to call it, spiritual poverty when contrasted with my life. However, if I was a billionaire, would I not act the way they act? Would I actually, and when I say a billionaire, I've been a billionaire for 10 years or whatever, not like me today with my value system and my wife and my family and all the hindsight that gave me suddenly became a billionaire. But if I had done the whole ultra hard work thing for ages and ages and gave everything up and then began to socialize with women again, and I hadn't done it since I was in high school, or I hadn't fully, their mental perspective is quite different from the rest of society. So I understand it, but I think it's like a temporary optimum, and it isn't the maximum optimum. If they could get above that and then try to structure a wholesome life, I think that some billionaire class men rarely in history did structure wholesome lives, and they ended up with uniquely good relationships.
Yeah.
This is actually kind of messed up when you think about it, that once, I believe, as a man, well, and as a woman, it's shown, once you get above certain levels of wealth, the probability that you get married or get into a happy relationship are very low. There's studies of women who win a large amount of money, and what actually happens is they just divorce their husbands. But as a man, that you can be super, super wealthy and not have access to the levels of happiness and contentment that I have access to. It's not that you literally don't have access to them. It's just that the way the world is structured makes it astronomically harder for them to access this lifestyle than it is for me to access this lifestyle. So you can take someone like Elon, who I have enormous respect for. Do I think that he would be much more contented and satisfied with his life if he tried settling down with one person and bought a farmstead and moved to a more remote work situation and was able to spend, more time with his kids and more time with one partner who he was really invested in? Absolutely. I do not think that he has access to the quality of life that I have access to. Yet I believe he has done more to make the world a better place than I do, and thus deserves more, which is sad. And then you could look at the other ultra wealthy people that have, I guess I'd call them sort of serial monogamous relationships. That is, monogamy with divorce. So they have, some simulacrum of a monogamous life. But I think they even have less happy lives than someone like Elon. So here I'm thinking of someone like a Jeff Bezos, when I look at the ways that this woman who, took all this money that he made and really didn't contribute much of anything is spending it on, she could not have been a pleasant person to be married to. She just seems, a complete NPC, which would be so sad to be married to. Or speaking of NPCs, people could be like, well, what about Mark Zuckerberg? He seems to be in a stable, long-term monogamous relationship. But I'm not really convinced that he is not. He just seems fully urban monoculture to the extent that he is just one of those NPC memes plus. And I think that the level of happiness, or really the depths of emotions that are accessible by somebody in an NPC state, are fairly limited. And this is another problem that we see, because I think this is a mistake that Jeff Bezos made, which is, yes, you can be ultra wealthy and in a totally monogamous relationship, but if that person is a total NPC, it's just not going to be interesting. This is why for Elon, I'd recommend, if he was going to settle down with somebody who's weird and interesting and willing to go against social mores, like Grimes, for example. I think would be a very good long-term partner for him. And I think that when he had tried long-term relationships to begin with, the problem is that the people weren't as weird as him. And it's also something where I reflect on, when the media is mean to me, or when people in public are mean to me and they're like, oh, Malcolm, you monster, you X, Y, Z. I often have to take a moment to reflect on how good my life is. And it's almost impossibly good. It's almost impossibly good when I reflect on my life these days. It feels like sort of the before scene in like a Punisher movie or something like that, which creates this sort of dread that I guess I constantly feel like it can't be this good. And the way that I have come to terms with that is to consider that this must be a reward for me tanking all of the hate that my wife and I get publicly and all of the threats that my wife and I get publicly, and that we are being rewarded for the difference that I hope we are, well, not I hope, I know we are trying to make in the world, and I hope that is realized in the world. And I guess I could see my current undeserved contentedness as a sign that we might be successful at this, so long as we can tank through all the hatred.
But there is a final thing that I wanted to say for normal men. And we can do a whole episode on why I don't think like polyamory often works for middle income people.
Okay.
But because I've had more time to see the outcomes of it with my friend group.
Longitudinal research.
We hang out with a lot of like tech guys in California.
Yeah. Okay.
people,
Longitudinal
stuff like that.
anecdata. Yes.
But yeah, and my anecdata is it basically never works. Actually, I can't think of I can think of one long-term instance where it seems to have worked.
Do I know it?
Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, don't name names.
Yeah, I don't want to name names. I don't know. It's public. It seems pretty happy.
I wouldn't name names.
Okay, I won't
Take
name
that
that.
out.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'll take that out. But what I was going to say is the other thing that's worth noting is alongside conjugal duties is there's a few things to accept here. Sex, non-reproductive sex, is inherently sinful. All non-reproductive sex is basically a fetish. It is pleasure for pleasure's sake, even if it is a bonding ritual. At the end
Now,
of the day,
so it's sinful if you, like us, do not think that happiness has inherent value.
I'm talking about in our system, and I think
Yes.
in most, I say real Christian systems. I know there's some Christian systems that have moved to this worship of the flesh, where it's, in marriage, sex is a holy thing always. And I am like, no, reproductive sex is, but sex more broadly, I don't think that is true. You are using another human's body to masturbate. It is a form of sin. It takes away from your time that you are being productive. But that doesn't mean that because we all sin, we aren't Jesus, right? So we all do things that are meant to satisfy ourselves. And as a partner to your spouse, while you have a duty to help uplift them as a person and improve as a person, you also have a duty to max out their happiness stat. I'd say the little green triangle on a sim, your duty to your spouse is to make sure that's always as green as possible. And what
Oh,
that means is not just sex. And that's the important thing, is it means that you need to understand the sins that they are not currently working on and allow them to indulge in those sins where so long as they are making improvements in other areas.
Mm.
With men, this means that because a lot of women don't desire sex in the same way men do in a long-term relationship, right?
Yeah.
But they have other sins. For example, desiring status signaling jewelry, such as, or desiring
or fancy trips or
fancy
furniture,
trips,
whatever it might be.
furniture. And you have a duty in the same way that they have a duty to try to help maximize your mood and self-perception
Mhm.
as you are working on that together, right?
Mhm.
You have a duty to them in the same regards.
Yep.
And so I would say that it is as bad if you have the financial resources to invest in things like that, unless you explicitly agree to not before the marriage. And this is why marriage contracts are so important, because otherwise you're operating off societal defaults.
Yes.
But within societal defaults, I think that there is some duty to supply the woman, especially if that woman is doing her job and trying to make you as happy as possible, to supply her with the things that she needs for the same sort of validation that you're getting from that sex. And that might be jewelry, it might be pearls, it might be nice furniture, it might be a pet, for example. There are many self-perception modifying things. It's just that one of the most gendered towards men is sex. And yet our society has built this bizarre consent concept today. And I'm not saying that consent doesn't matter at all, but I'm like, when you just are like, consent is like a steel thing that can never be crossed, you end up with this really horrible framework where a wife can just always say no, right? Like, just no, we're not having sex anymore. And consent, and you can't get mad at me for saying this. And it's like, that's silly. The way this works in real life, in a family where like you're actually have a caring relationship with your partner, is one person's, I value this, and the other partner's, I value this, or I'm not in the mood for this today. Could we do it this time or under these other conditions? For example, my wife would say these days, I've got a small infant in the room. I don't want to hire a nanny to deal with the infant. I don't want to put the infant in another room while we're having sex. So let's wait until the infant is old enough that it could be with somebody else, or that I feel comfortable leaving it outside the room for a period of time. That is a completely reasonable thing to say. And I think that consent absolutism removes reasonable conversations from the table.
I think the thing I have problems with around the way consent is being framed in modern society is that denying consent is treated as a costless activity instead of an activity that needs some level of explanation, which allows something to happen like, for example, a stay-at-home wife who isn't really contributing much of anything to a relationship just constantly denying a man consent, like permanent consent denial, and thinking that the relationship can stay stable, and that then if he wants a divorce or he wants to leave or he wants to cheat, that he is 100% at fault and there is no culpability upon the person who was denying consent. It is not that I don't think that consent shouldn't be respected. Absolutely. It is that we should not, because we respect consent so seriously, that we should not act as if denying consent bears some cost. I guess I'd call it like informed consent, which is to say the denial of consent with an explanation that is time-gated or resolvable. Like, I don't want to sleep with you now because I find you unattractive due to your weight gain. That's fine, because that's, okay, well, so lose weight, then I'll want to sleep with you again.
But what were you going to say? Because you really wanted to say something.
Consent matters. Also, if someone feels like they're having genuine non-consent with anything in a marriage. And that's not necessarily with intimacy. It could also be with a partner, for example, making purchases that are not approved. That is a form of infidelity, period.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's a form of infidelity. I'd say so I do agree that in that sense, consent matters. So what I'm saying here is
Feeling like it, being in the mood.
Demanding that a person obeys your consent request without consequences for denying consent. By that, what I mean is if a wife continually declines consent without any real reason, that would be a case where a husband would be justified in becoming angry and saying that the wife is violating the assumptions of their marriage. In the same way where it is a violation if a woman like takes a bunch of money or spends a bunch of money without the man's consent, but it is also a violation if the man never ever grants consent for the woman to splurge on herself.
Yeah. I would also say though, when you get to a point where relationships involve asking for things,
yeah,
like,
they shouldn't even ever
let
get to
alone
that.
denial, just asking for things is being, if I always have to ask you for sex, something's gone wrong. If that's an important thing in our relationship.
No, I agree with that 100%.
If you always have to ask me to clean up, something's gone wrong. One, when in an ideal situation, relationship requests should be like improv. The answer is yes, but also you should be like the ultimate servant to your partner because you are unified with them toward a larger goal. You should be anticipating their needs. Like you said, putting them only after God and your children and doing everything you can to make their lives more enjoyable. But if they're not doing the same, your relationship's on thin ice. So,
well, and that's a really great point, is that concepts like consent, as progressives use the term, begin to not make sense in a well-structured relationship, because in a well-structured relationship, both people generally consider the needs of the other before their own needs. I would never question that Simone is definitely in almost everything she does during the day, always putting my needs before her own. And as such, I feel comfortable in everything I do, always putting her needs before mine. So when there is arguments, the arguments are often about something that I want to do for her and she feels is unjustified. Oh, I want to splurge on you as this. And you're just like, no, I don't want this. Or you wanting to splurge on me with something. And I'm like, no, it wouldn't make me happy enough to offset the cost. And so we're not going to do that right now.
No, I will say that sometimes I bring things up where I know that I want something that is not in the best collective interests of our family and our morals.
Yeah, but those are never things that hurt me. It's like you coming to me and saying, do I have permission to not go to this party? It's never like a favor you're doing. When it comes to the things for me, they are always done and often. And this is another thing I think is really important, and I would consider a duty of a spouse. If you're considering the duties of your relationship, it is to notice and think and show appreciation for the things your spouse does without telling you or request, and that this appreciation cannot run dry just because your relationship has existed a long time.
And I also think that's like a meaningful flirtation and dating strategy in general, that retard level relationship action is things like, your eyes are so pretty, you're so beautiful, you're so handsome, whatever. And I tell you, gorgeous all the time, but that's retard level compliment. What I think gives people the most sense of satisfaction, the greatest dopamine hit, is when people recognize actions that they've taken, things for which they actually have responsibility. Okay, women can put a lot of effort into their appearance, but then you can recognize, wow, the way you styled your hair today is just incredible. How did you braid your hair that way? But it should be around your actions, or wow, the way that you immediately anticipated the kids were going to freak out when this thing happened and you made sure that they were okay. It just really made me feel fantastic. And I can't thank you enough. Like, complimenting actions or complimenting moments, so much more meaningful than just complimenting attributes over which people have no control and haven't put any effort. Because anyone, even people who actually aren't working that hard, feel like they're putting in some kind of effort, even if it's getting out of bed or like getting dressed. And being recognized for stuff that they personally put energy into gives them much more of a dopamine hit than stuff that they don't feel like they worked on that day.
Yes. And yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And that's a great way when you're thinking about how do you actually make your partner feel good. It's notice the things that they're putting effort into and compliment those things. But it's just also important because if they do something like, even if it's my wife's duty to do the dishes, is no, she's choosing to do the dishes, and you need to show appreciation for that every time.
Yeah, it's one of the things of value that partner offers in the relationship. If you don't value that, then why on earth should they be putting in the effort?
Yeah, and then they won't feel delight or appreciation. Now, the final thing I'm going to note here, because something that I noticed when I was ruminating on the point I had made earlier. I was like, no, it is actually traditional in Christian cultures for the very wealthy and most powerful men to have multiple partners. And then I thought of an exception. It is normal in Catholic and Orthodox countries. It is not normal in the historic context in Protestant countries. Consider King Henry VIII. He had to literally have his wives killed to get additional women.
He had side chicks. He had a son with a side chick.
Oh, he did. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I'm wrong. Yeah.
Sorry. Men are men.
He did have side chicks. You're right. So even in Protestant countries, you had it.
Yeah.
And the side chick wasn't the problem. The problem is that the son wasn't.
It was the legitimacy.
He wanted a legitimate heir.
Yeah.
All right. So even there, just always, I love when people appeal to a Christian traditionalism that is just a complete fabrication of what actual Christian history was like.
Yeah.
And it's they're
nice try.
This was actually more complicated than that, which is always interesting to me. Or they'll be like, oh, in the Bible, it was always one man and one woman. And it definitely was not. You have the case of, oh God, what's the case I'm thinking of? Where the guy was too old, and so his wife said he could sleep with their slave to have a kid.
Oh, yeah. That story was always so weird to me.
Yes. Sarah, Hagar, and Abraham. And literally the source of the Abrahamic tradition. So it's in all of the Abrahamic tradition that this is not like the most... It is actually really interesting to me, and we'll do another episode on this. This LARP of the Christian lifestyle that doesn't match lifestyles in the Bible or that are described in the Bible, but instead matches Hollywood's description of a Christian in the 1950s, which was like never like a real thing. And it's just interesting to me that people will say with such conviction, these are Christian values, when they are not the values of the Bible or historically Christian communities, but they are just so convinced that they're Christian values. And it's baffling to me, but it shows you how like cultural consensus works. People always want to believe everything is archaic when often it's not. One of the episodes we'll do when I get around to it. And I do need to do it because I have too many pro-Jewish episodes, and I need to do an episode that's going to make people think, oh, Jews aren't going to like this, which is on how quickly the Jewish religion has evolved recently, and that the medieval Jewish religion and culture is almost completely disconnected from the modern Jewish religion culture.
I'm dying to hear more about this. Yeah, you keep referring to this.
It requires a lot of research. But here, for people who don't believe me, for example, I will put on a screen right now a picture of a medieval Catholic and a picture of a modern Catholic. Now I am going to put on the screen a picture of an ultra-conservative medieval Jew and a picture of a ultra-conservative modern Jew. And for those who are listening on podcast and don't know what medieval Jews look like, they look like they are wearing a go piece as a hat, and they are wearing green, and it's got like a ball at the top of a hat. And you know what modern Jews look like. They have like long curly hair things and all sorts of other...
I should note here for anyone who's like, oh, you're just talking about fashion. What does that have to do with religious identity? The episode, the reason why it needs a whole episode is actually going to go over all sorts of traditions and things that are core to the religious tradition, and show that, around 50% or more are modern. In the same way that, like, if I'm looking at an Amish community and you ask an Amish community, when was your community founded? And they'd be like, well, at the death of Christ. And it's like, well, I mean, but from an outsider's perspective, when was your community founded? Because when I look at Amish and I'm like, this is what makes you Amish, you're talking about like the 1800s. So, and I also need to note this in the context of, I'm not really saying it's a new religion. It's more that in the same way that some languages, like when you're looking at language groups, you will find that some languages are incredibly preserved and change very, very little over history, and other languages evolve incredibly quickly. And yet, because they completely replace the iteration that came before them, it makes sense to call them the same language, even though they would be completely uninterpretable to people, maybe even a few hundred years apart. That's sort of what we're talking about here. So it's a tricky subject and deserving of a full episode.
Are you looking up medieval Jew?
No, I just wanted to say if people are really interested in Catholic, where there's this particular podcast on Catholic fashion that I thought was absolutely fantastic. I just think religious fashion is really interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it's really fascinating as well. Anyway, love you to death, Simone. You are amazing. And I hope our fans are having a wonderful day and that we can get feedback on the lavalier system.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. Love you, gorgeous.
Love you too.
Man, I'm so happy now. That feeling at the end of the day when you've eaten all the frogs, you've eaten all of them, so many frogs.
How am I coming through, by the way?
Say something more.
Hello, Simone. I am excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, it sounds not as good as the super high quality mics, but at least now you can talk freely.